it is possible to conciliate two different ways of thinking?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. It's a complicated thing, and that's one of the things that we learn from trying to deal with these conflicts. It's such an honor to be here in Mexico, a country that certainly knows conflicts, that certainly knows natural disasters, and has tried to cope with these two issues that the International Center for Conciliation at the present time is working on in Palestine and other parts of the Middle East. I met here people of great learnedness, great experience, and great commitment. It focused on books, and here we are in a wonderful bookstore. Well, one of the problems of dealing with a conflict is that you try to understand the history, but it's always so complicated. So, for example, one of the great historians that I have been mentioning is Benny Morris. He's written 3 books on the origins of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When his first book came out, he was considered a revisionist historian. He was very critical of the standard history that's being taught in Israel and, for that matter, in Palestine, and brought important revisions. A few years later, he thought, and he said, no, that's not right. And his second book is considered more right-wing than most other books that came out in the same period. Ultimately, he wrote a book, 1948, and that is really...
1948.
1948. And what he demonstrates is that, whereas everyone thinks intention, plan, this scheme, that scheme, it was all what they call in Yiddish schlemiels. No one knew what the other one was doing. There are places in which there was agreement, places in which there was no agreement. Any of the most basic things that we know about 1948, 1949, the way in which the country was redivided after the UN proposal.
Some will say it's the origin. Some will say it's the origin of the conflict. We know the conflict comes from way back, but and way nearer.
So one of the great tragedies of the conflict is the refugee camps,
yes.
And the West Bank and the areas in which Palestinians are living are reminded by the great tragedies of people seemingly stuck in the mud. Nothing has happened. They were there, and that's it. Now, that is a false impression. We don't know why and how the refugee camps were established. There was certainly a lot of movement in and out, but there were refugees after the war all over the world. And somehow there were redivisions of people, all kinds of compromises made. Somehow in Palestine, this notion of refugees was forced on the people. They weren't allowed to leave the camp. They had to, sneak out. And 1948, 1949, 1950, 1951, years where Europe, new settlements were made, lands were refunded. In Israel and Palestine, this did not happen. It left marked scars in the lives of people, and it's still being used as a volleyball.
All right. And this has created a history of hate.
It contributes to the history of hate, yes.
It's a very hard thing to take out.
Yeah.
When you speak and you want to say...
What about the refugee camps?
What about refugee camps? What about territories? What about Israel? What about terrorist attack? What about the killings? What about Munich? What about... You have many heads there. How to conciliate and how to cut this and get in agreement.
I in the last years, have had the opportunity of meeting and speaking and getting to know the chief negotiators of Israel and some of the negotiators of Palestine. And there seems to be agreement, certainly among the Israelis, that the difficult things on the agenda are not the territories and not the borders, that these have been worked out. There are all kinds of compromises that were established, that were introduced by Arab countries, and agreement was very, very close. There's something deeper that is holding back the the type of cooperation that could happen between, say, France and Germany. France and Germany, they were at war for years and years and years. Ultimately, they just got exhausted with the war. They decided that it was better to cooperate.
And like that, we have many examples.
And many examples. So right now, the world between colonialism and globalization is going in both directions. There's regression. European Union is falling apart. We don't know what's going to substitute for this. And on the other hand, there are consolidations in different places. So the conflict is now caught on the thorns of that kind of dilemma. And we believe that there's lots to be done, firstly, on the humanitarian level. And that's what I'm involved in. I believe that the murderousness, the neglect of lives, this is just unnecessary. In other parts of the border of Israel, Syria, which was a hostile border, that border has been open since the beginning of the war. Syrians have been helped, have been brought in, have received operations. No doctor at any Israeli hospital has ever protested the fact that people are coming from enemy countries.
That shows that you can get a good cooperation between them, that can be peace between them. You know that there are many organizations looking for peace between Palestinians and Israel, between Arabs and Israel, but that's not enough. Governments looks like they don't want it, or they cannot get it, or there are many other things. Are you positive that it could be an arrangement that someday, in these days that we are living, we'll see this peace?
It's happening right now. Peace is growing from the bottom up, where there can be cooperation with the government. There is cooperation with the government. This is the way my NGO operates. I have no illusions about us being able to do things that governments can do, but we work with the governments, and moreover we are training leadership for a next generation, people who are very smart, well educated, but don't have the opportunities to have experiences, to learn the basics of civil society, how decisions are made. All these things are happening right now.
Can you erase the history of hate?
Can't erase it, but we can certainly make up for it with a history of vitality, cooperation, mutual respect, and people living decent lives. Martyrdom is not a value that all people in Israel and Palestine share. It's repeated in the ideologies of the PLO and other organizations. In Israel, it's hinted at celebrations of the great catastrophes. But there is a generation in Palestine that's emerging that understands that martyrdom is not the measure of all things, and that living a fulfilling life of dignity and being dignified by neighbors will achieve much more. That is happening.
You know that outside Israel, or maybe in Israel or there, we tend to get notices and to take sides and take them perfectly strong them. To say Israel is good, Palestine are bad, or Palestine is good, Israel is bad. We take them and everything becomes black and white, and who is good and who is bad. How to discover and to get the information that there are good things in both sides. How to tell them what can we do here in Mexico and outside Israel.
Well, firstly, let's look at our own countries. Let's look at our own families. We call it a family. Our families all cooperating, doing the best thing for each other. What kind of rivalries and what kind of feuds develop in families, in communities, in town. In Mexico and the United States right now, we have an unbelievable polarization which indicates that the Civil War never ended. But it's not exactly a straight line. At the beginning of the Civil War commemoration, and the press has not picked this up, some of the same towns in the South that are now fighting about keeping up monuments were having community remembering of lynch mobs and lynching. and going into great depth about the terrible things that happened, and blacks and whites coming together and talking about these things and vowing never again. This was going on for years. Why has this stopped, and why have hoodlum organizations, Nazi organizations, received this respectability? We have some problems in American society right now. So you can't talk about Palestinians versus Israelis. These are divided communities with different kinds of factions, but there has to be governance and government. When I am in Palestine and I speak to some of my friends, part of their great fear is becoming the next Syria. Now, what was Syria? Syria was a huge civil war. It wasn't initially invasions and interventions that were, negative and not serving any population. It was a civil war, and civil wars could be happening any place. It's been happening in Palestine. It could happen in Israel. So you can't just talk about Israelis and Palestinians. Firstly, we have to keep the humanitarian perspective. We have to save lives. We cannot kill children. We cannot raise children to become killers. This has to stop. That has to do with education on both sides.
What can we do in Mexico for that education?
Yeah.
And to spread the word that it can be. That's important. We
Firstly,
have to spread the word. We do it in the other Judío. You do it.
Yeah.
What can we do here?
Look at periods in which you had great leaders that became, global great leaders that became legendary. Mexico was not always disturbed by corrupt leaders and gangsters and things like that. You had better times in your politics. So progress is not a straight line. Mexico has regressed to some extent, but there are new forces that are working together, that are focusing on the real issues, that are leaders in the rest of Latin America. The same thing will happen in the Middle East. In 2020, there are going to be Palestinians who are going to be going out all over the world to deal with the environmental problem. There are Palestinians now who are concerned about what's happening in India with a minority Palestinian population, a minority Muslim population, 140 million Muslims. But they are the most enlightened and most educated, and they are being threatened by the Hindu population, and no one is talking about that. There are Palestinians who want to take leadership in something like that. Now that's extraordinary. That's what it is to be a nation. That's what it is to have pride and dignity, and there'll be more of that if we work hard.
Thank you very much.